So, hello and welcome to Coach, the professional coaching podcast, and another exciting and deep dive episode coming up for you here. My guest today is someone that I've spoken to before, and many times in between, actually, Jay Allen. And Jay and I like to have some very deep discussions about all kinds of things. And we thought we would bring some of this to you today. So, I want to welcome Jay Allen to the show. He is a scale-up coach for the professional services industry. He's also a business strategist. And I have to say that one of the reasons I've got him on the podcast today is because he also holds a master's in international business leadership and a degree in business ethics. And while we're not here to kind of like beat you with all the titles and blind you with science, you'll understand why this podcast is particularly relatable to those two key areas when we get going. So welcome, Jay. Welcome to the show.
Most kind of you having me. Thank you very much, Teresa.
Absolute pleasure. And today, if you haven't guessed already, we are going to be talking about ethics in the coaching industry specifically, but also ethics, personal ethics, really, values, ourselves, and business ethics, and how that really all translates and plays out, and what we can do to be more ethical, more congruent with ourselves and our clients. Because one of the conversations that I'm having a lot, and of course some of you may be having, is the fact that, you know, we're just a bit tired and a bit over getting sort of beaten with the same sticks in the coaching industry, which is the same old messages. And it's not the messages of let's be successful, make money, and, you know, create wealth, because those things are I'm super behind. But it's really how it's done and what's going on in the dark corners and behind the scenes of the shiny socials that really is quite unethical, and how we can really shine a light on that and help ourselves as well as everybody else. So welcome to the podcast. This is what we're going to dig into. First of all, can I kick off, Jay, with just asking you what ethics means to you and what your ethics are, just personally, as an ex-veteran as well, and as a man, family man, husband, and business owner, everything, just you as Jay. What does ethics mean to you?
Great question. Thanks very much for the introduction. For me, it's about doing the right thing because it's the right things to do, as opposed to doing the right thing because there's an ulterior motive.
Yeah, and of course that's really subjective, isn't it? Because what's right for you might not be right for me. And I think this is where I'm really interested in the nuance of the ethical discussion, because I don't really know what's right for you. You don't know what's right for me. So how do we get a little bit deeper on that? So how do you know what's right for you, Jay? What goes on within you where you come up against a situation where you need to make, say, for example, a more ethical decision, which all of our steers should be on that? What actually happens, and what process do you go through that means, you know what, I know that that's right for me?
Well, ironically, it's a double-edged sword. At a personal level, certainly in life, rather than just applying this to business, I'm very fortunate and proud to say that I'm an active Christian, and I find that, you know, the good book, as we'll say, regardless of which particular version of a book that you choose to read these days, often sets a set of moral principles to which we can all then measure ourselves and give considerations to. But if we were to take it away from that and look more specifically in a business sense, rather than saying what's right for me, is about being able to say, if I need to remain of service rather than delivering a service, in order for me to establish what's right, I first have to determine as to what are the parameters of what's acceptable and what's required or desired by the person with whom I'm serving, and then determine, have I got it within my skill set? Is it within my locker to be able to enable any form of service to be able to aid and support that person, or is the right things to do to refer them to somebody else who is better equipped to be able to provide them and their help and support? So in actual fact, when I say what's right for you, what I'm actually referring to is to take you out the equation altogether and to ask a series of questions to better get to know the person you aims to serve, to establish, have you got it within your skill sets to be of service?
Yeah, and I really love that answer, because of course, you know, there is no sort of personal or business separation. I don't think. You're either ethical in what you do and how you follow through and how you serve your friends, family, and clients, or you're not. Or sometimes there's some, I don't know, if there's some differences, then that's a problem, right? So it's great that you mentioned being Christian, following a faith, you know, as a lot of people do, and also a lot of people don't. It's a very individual thing, but it's that moral steer that you're referencing there, isn't it? That's like, this is what I believe in. So whether you call it, you know, the good book, the Bible, or whatever your kind of guides are, it's your values, the values that you believe in.
Very much so. If you look up the definition of the word ethics in the Oxford English Dictionary, it says a moral set of principles that govern our personal behaviours.
Yeah, that's it. A moral set of principles. And of course, again, what's so interesting is that kind of what's moral for me isn't moral for another. Do you know? And people say, oh, they might say that's so immoral of them. But I would imagine if you spoke to that person, they would not describe themselves ever as immoral. So a lot of it is perception, but it's also, you know, what moral set are we following? And so of course that can be, you know, that's a very philosophical conversation, but I think what's clear there is that it does depend on us and our values, what's important to us, and following that at all times, even if, and jumping into that business arena, if it means that we might not get the client, or we might, you know, that might not be somebody that joins our program, or, you know, it's that really where it's, and like you say, you've brought in service, well, it's not right for them. So if it's right for me, it should be right for you, right? It should be a whole energy. So yeah, I love that. Thank you. And you know, I think probably the same answer is in here, but why is it important to you? Like, why does it matter so much? I mean, again, and we must bring it in because it's a really important element of who you are. And of course, what you've been through as an ex-vet as well. So you have a faith, you've also got, you know, incredibly colourful and decorated background, and you've, you know, become resilient around a lot of things. So based on all of that, why does it matter to be ethical, Jay? Why does it even matter? Why don't we just sort of, you know, crack on and do the best we can?
At a personal level, and again, thanks very much for sharing about my, you know, my service background. I was very conscious when I joined the British Army that whilst the majority of people, I'm not saying all, but whilst the majority of people, certainly within the select group that I joined up with, there was 54 of us on the train station that morning on the 15th of September that joined that platoon. And I was very conscious of the fact that of the 54 of us, there was probably about 50 that had been destined for the British Army since they were out of diapers, really. They either came from a military family or they got a military offspring. The brothers or sisters or uncles and aunts they'd known all the way through their upbringing as to almost which regiment they were going to join when they were old enough. I was certainly in the minority. I don't come from a military family at all. I made a conscious decision a year into my second year of university that I chose that I wanted to go and serve Queen and country for a short period of time. And therefore, when I entered that, I entered it with a completely different mindset. I came to it from a very different perception of what perhaps other people had of these preconceived ideas of what the army was. I didn't necessarily have a lot of that because I hadn't got any military backgrounds to rely on. What I had determined and what I learned within my second year of qualifying as a psychologist was this desire to be of service. And the best way I could possibly do that at the time was when the army were looking for postgrad recruits. I put my name forwards to be of service to Queen and country, and then subsequently chose to join the medical corps as opposed to a fighting arm in order to be of service to others within the community, in the military community, both friend and foe. And the benefit of that, and the reason why it's ingrained within me so much, I found faith as an adult as opposed to being brought up in a faith-strong family background, was one, witnessing what a complete breakdown of ethics and morals and standards does to a community, does to a humanity in some of the most horrific places I've ever visited and had the privilege to serve alongside other people in Bosnia and Kosovo and East Timor and Sierra Leone, and then further afield with the Médecins Sans Frontières in humanitarian aid groups, to be able to see as to exactly what a breakdown of moral principles does to humanity, and establish that I want to do everything in my power to be able to support a set of moral principles rather than be party to allowing those to degrade and disappear disappear off into what becomes abyss, if you like. So there was this moral background of having witnessed what the other side of it looks like. And then to come back into business and say, well, we've got to make a profit, we've got to, and then look at some of the, with respect, charlatans, not necessarily in coaching, but across business, who are promising the earth just in order to be able to chase the money, subsequently to get caught out again and again and again. I just wanted to believe that there was another way of doing business, and you don't have to cut your own principles. You don't have to be able to fall into the trap of the shiny social media lies that so many people tell, that there is another way of doing business. And so I set out when we first launched the coaching business back in May 15, we launched My True North. And we set out with a set of principles that I believe were the ones that I wanted to live by, the things that I'd lived by as a veteran and the things that I wanted to continue to live by as a human being. And what I subsequently found as the business continued to grow, I took on my first employee 5 weeks after setting the business up, and my second one 9 weeks later. We were a 3-person business within the first quarter. And I subsequently realized that there was a real opportunity, almost a niche, for being able to work in a set of principles that perhaps weren't necessarily being marketed as such in favor of a buy now, pay later scheme that everyone else seemed to be offering.
That's really interesting. And thank you for that. What I've heard in all of that is just a huge value of service to others. That's the biggest value that you speak in, Jay, there is wanting to serve. And of course, if your intention is to serve, then it's not really about you. It's all about the other person and what they need. And you talk about having seen the different perspectives. And of course, that creates, your map of the world and your perspective and how you want it to be. And so bringing that into business and bringing that into a set of principles is a phenomenal framework. And I suppose, we all bring that in without the words written on the page. Like sometimes people will set a mission statement or a value statement, like bigger companies, they set these out and nobody ever really knows who it is unless they've got a really sort of ethical great culture in their company where people really live by those principles. So to do it in a small business, I think is really important. And it kind of leads me to one of the questions later on, which is about how can we have a more ethical coaching business or whatever company, but we are speaking specifically about that. So you've brought your own principles in. Can you share a few of those, Jay? I don't know how many you have in the framework, but it would be just interesting to get an insight to a couple of your principles that you run your business by.
Yes, certainly, no trouble at all. I mean, I firmly believe that this is something that you have to live by as opposed to something that you wear from Monday to Friday, 9 till 5 type of
Sure.
Mm-hmm. So it's something that has to come from within as opposed to a glossy poster that we simply stick on the wall. I think there's a need to be able to do some research around moral principles to determine as to what words and phrases resonate with people the most in order for them to determine whether they are core principles or simply a set of principles which perhaps leads to a set of core principles, and then subsequently almost prioritize them to say, well, if I only want 5 or 6, I don't think you should ever have more than 6 or 7 because it becomes quite difficult to be able to establish as to how you manage yourself within those. But if you're going to have about perhaps half a dozen, to then determine as to, well, which word or words come together to accumulate a single phrase that might be able to, we can live to and be measured against. So some of the things that within our moral and core principles are things like integrity. And what I mean by that is being truthful and honest with the good, the bad and the ugly about us and our business as much as we are of service to others. So within the first 6 months, and I'm not again suggesting or professing that we should all do this, but certainly within the first 6 months of us setting the business up in 2015, I used to share my monthly management accounts with all of my clients and show them as to how much money we'd generated that month, where it had come from, where we'd reinvested it, what we were doing with it, the profit margin, and then shared with them. And if you want us to be able to enable you to be able to achieve those sort of results in your business, then I'm showing you that we're living proof that it's possible and able to be do so. And I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that we should all go out and do that every month, but to the same extent, it was all about integrity and honesty. One of
Can I just say something there? That's really interesting. Excuse me. So one of the things there that's just come up for me is that it doesn't really matter about the context or the content of what you're sharing. You're talking about a value of integrity and about being honest and transparent and open, and that can happen and translate very easily to anyone's business, where, and we see it a lot, you know, we see the sharing, the vulnerability when people are talking about things are not going so well for me. They may share something that's what we might call behind the scenes, something personal. And when people first come to the space, the online space, that's often something which is very unfamiliar to them. They're thinking, well, I don't really need to be talking about that, do I? Why would I want to share that? And so I think it's important to have this discussion here, because your choice of integrity is around financial integrity there at that point. Some people may or may not want to do that, doesn't really even matter, but it's a way of doing it. Absolutely. It's almost like you're treating them as if they were shareholders. You're accountable to them, and that's that ethic. But it could just be, couldn't it, Jay, that if someone wants to be in integrity with themselves, that they now and then just tell people what's really going on or how they're feeling, maybe to just get an insight, share something about a family member or a personal emotion. We could really put that into the same description, could we not, depending on what we're comfortable with?
Very much so. I'm very fortunate to be able to call Daniel Priestley, of whom many I'm sure will be familiar with his work in Dent Universe, and the key person of influence author. But I'm very fortunate to be able to call Daniel a close friend. And I'll never forget Daniel saying in 2018 at a conference we both spoke at about there being micro trends of things that are happening in the moment, and then trends, and then almost mass trends that almost go through generational change. The first time bell bottoms were worn, and oh, Mum, what are you doing wearing those? Well, I had them from the first time. Now there are long-term trends that go round and become fashionable again type stuff. And I'll never forget, Daniel said, we've just come to the end, or coming to the end, about 2017, 2018, of a mass trend, a longer trend. Now, forgive me, I'm not quite sure about the profanities on the podcast, but I'm just quoting, paraphrasing, that we've come to the end of a bullshit baffles brains phase, where we've lied and cheated, and we've witnessed people promising the earth and delivering very little, and a year or almost an era of frustration with regards to not getting what we thought we were paying for. And we've come to the end of that era. And he predicted 1819 that the new era, probably of the next 10, 12, 15 years, is actually where vulnerability actually becomes a currency to be able to build rapport with other people. And instead of just promising the earth and showing this nice, shiny, polished image, to actually go under the hood, or like you say, behind the scenes, and actually show the integrity of a person by sharing the warts and all, I'm one with you, not I'm preaching from the converted, will actually help to be able to buy rapport and build rapport, to buy favor with people, as opposed to seen as weakness or risk and not to be shared.
Absolutely. And I think that's interesting, because I think that's how we have always built relationships as humans. But when we get into the business arena, the performance arena, the showing up arena, the career arena, especially from our generation, we're pretty much taught, well, you go to work, don't take your problems to work, get on with it, put a brave face on, deal with that stuff later, sort of thing. And there wouldn't really, and probably still I guess it's shifted a little, but I guess it's also still the same in some ways. In the corporate world, I can only speak from my experience, where there was no room for that. So, I would turn up, I would sell, I would perform, I would achieve, I would hit goals, I would get commission, I would be up on the podium, I would do the things, and then I would go home and continue to do it, and then I would do it again. There was no space for me to come in talking about how I felt, or whether I did find it challenging or whether I didn't, because that would absolutely have been perceived as weakness. And, oh, I don't know, Teresa, must we get you on a plan? Like, what's going on? Yeah. And when I started to lose joy in my corporate role, and my values had shifted because I had a daughter and I was single parenting, and I was finding that tough, to deliver to everything. And, I wasn't as excited as I used to. I wasn't as, normally in the top 5. I might have been in the top 6 now. And I got a call. Oh, hi, T, how's it going? And you think, oh my God. And it was all very sort of barbed and disguised and clouded in basically, could you please pull your socks up and get back up into 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, because that's where we need you. That's where we need you. Yes, I know that you've had a child, blah, 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 but we need you there. And so it was that energy. And although those words weren't said, and they were also very supportive, it wasn't the truth. So this goes on in corporate as well. So it can be difficult, of course, when people maybe come out of that, break free from that, come into an online space to create a coaching business, realize all the opportunities and freedom, but find it very difficult to share or to allow people into those spaces. But that doesn't make them unethical. It doesn't make them out of integrity. But it's like, how can we lean into that based on what you're saying just a little bit more? And I think that's coming through. We've got some people who are open books. And listen, as humans, aren't we just nosy? We're like, oh, that's interesting. Oh dear. And we empathize, we sympathize, we laugh, we cry. We do these things with people. But I think the problem, and see if you agree with me, is that it's tricky sometimes to bring into that balance in business when you want to show up well, when you are a leader. So let's talk about that a little bit, Jay, how you can translate that into sort of ethical leadership. So where you're leading company, you're leading people, you're leading clients. And I think we want this new way of where we're meeting on the same level, our clients. We don't want this guru status thing going on. But how do we lead and also be vulnerable? How do we let people in, but also maintain that leadership vibe?
Teresa, great question. As you'll probably recall, the last time that we spoke on the podcast, it was to be interviewed about it's okay to say I'm not okay. And we talked about mental health
Yes.
and the importance of being able to reach out for help. I certainly did 20 years ago, and thankfully I'm here as a result to tell the tale of that.
For sure.
So I'm not saying for 1 minute that we've got to go from this corporate stern, can't show any emotion, all the way through to crying at our desk every 25 minutes, because that's what the industry now require and expect. And certainly, as you said, I'm not trying to point any fingers, but both of you and I are of the era where that was expected, to be able to have this corporate face, that nothing broke the facade of who we were at work. And certainly there's a new generation of people who are far more open to being at one with their feelings publicly and professionally, and more comfortable with. And perhaps we need to be moving with the times and accepting that. But I think in terms of leadership, rather than being driven by a social agenda or what's happening on socials, is to be able to determine and do the work within and find your own moral principles and then stick with inside them and say, if I'm not a sharey type person, then that's okay.
Yes.
And I'm being ethically and morally valued, and showing value by letting people know that it's okay to not have to do that and be driven by social media and TikTok likes and the likes, dancing around like an idiot on a reel. Isn't something that I'm likely to be doing. It's not part of my moral principles. And I'm not trying to make any form of measure of whether it's right for somebody else or not.
No, because they're fun to watch, and we watch them, and I admire people that put themselves out there, and I'm like, wow, they've got they're such open books, and ready to try anything, and I do admire that. But I
think that's the key point, is the reason behind it, as to whether we feel that we're being pushed to do that by socials and social pressure. Certainly, when you look at the 3 levels of ethics, then social consciousness is the middle layer of the 3 layers of ethics. And when you look at social consciousness and being conscious of how is your role and your behavior playing out in the local particular society in which you want to be associated with, and how is that is being received by that, are you a leader or a follower? as opposed to, well, I feel pressured to do it because of my social media following's depreciated, and therefore I'm going to push myself to do something new, which is outside of my moral principles. I'm not saying outside of the comfort zone, but I'm saying, does it sit within our principles of who we are and what we're about as a person?
Yeah. And I think probably in some cases, of course, this is why we're discussing it, it would be, well, no, it doesn't. You know, sometimes people are told to do certain things because that's what's going to get the push, that's what's going to get the reach, and that's the only way you can do it. And yet inside they may be feeling, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do loads of reels. I don't want to post 3 times a day on stories. I don't want to. So yes, we can look into what is it you don't want to do, and is it just a confidence thing? And let's assume we've sorted all of that out, but it's just not your steer. There are lots of other ways, of course, to grow a business. And so you talk about that social consciousness, and that's a very interesting thing. Is that the level, Jay, where you'd say the most influence comes in, and where we could be missteered? And how can we get to what I'm going to presume is the higher level, really, which I suppose is about our identity and
absolutely
who we are.
So the primary level of ethical measure, if you like, is what we call rule consciousness, and that will be about either laws or civic duty or expected norms of parameters of behaviour. You know, we see people going out for a drink on a Friday night, we see them throwing up in the gutter at 4 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and all of a sudden we have a perception of whether they've broken the social norm, whether they've fallen outside the parameters. So the first level of rule measure, if you like, of ethics on a global scale, or moral principles, are considered rule consciousness. Are we falling in or outside of the law, or of our civic duty to protect other people's, to be at one, to be a collective community, if you like. The next layer up from that would be social consciousness, and we talk about what would be considered right or proper or done correctly, but again, or accepted, if you like, would be words that we'd use. But again, this isn't a global code. This is very much,
well, it can't be, can it?
No, it's got to be very specific to the societies to which you attribute yourself, to the community to which you want to be party to. So when we see things abroad or of extremism, and we turn around and we have a very moral view with regards to whether that's accepted or not, the simple fact is that it might not be accepted by our standards, but in actual fact, in the particular society that the person that's committing these acts is operating within, that's the moral accepted social responsibility or social consciousness of being parties to that society. And therefore you've got this hierarchical condition leadership with regards to how accepted you are in that society, and that will be the second level of global ethics, to be able to look at, are you accepted or seen as an influencer in your particular society. And then the third and the highest one is all about individual. It's called principled consciousness, and it's all about looking within your own identity and your moral principles as a person, as a human being, and not being influenced by others, but actually leading and influencing others yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just kind of like that self-actualization, isn't it, at the top? But you know, all of us really are living a level. We're in that middle. We are in that middle bracket. That's part of that whole triangle, if you like. Triangle is how I see it. And I think that's interesting, because we're talking about translating our morals, following our guidance into certain section of life. So say, for instance, you're a Christian and you follow that moral principle code. Find someone from another belief set, and that there's what I can't believe that you actually follow that, Jay. Like, that is just so not right. And they actually believe, and of course we see wars, unfortunately, and conflicts around this all the time. That's not right, and I will judge you for it, and that's not right, and that's unethical and immoral, and all these things come pouring out, the whole narrative. So it's really important, I suppose, to stay in our lane, if you want to put it in a really basic way. And if we want to explore and we want to debate, of course we can, with an open mind, because that gives us some growth perspective if we choose it. But in terms of being ethical and leading our businesses ethically, what I'm starting to hear from you, and I think it's just obvious, it just got to come from your values. What's important to you and why? and what's the next step, and follow that. And how does that show up in how you lead that program? How does that show up in how you sell that? How does that show up in the way that you talk to, on a stage, or into a room? Like, is that really following through? And so it's quite simple in a way. It doesn't have to sound so imposing ethical leadership. We're like, oh my gosh, but it doesn't have to be anything. We don't have to have degrees in it, and absolute respect to your learnings, and that's why I wanted you to come. But we don't need to do that in order to be ethical. We just need to look within, look at ourselves, and think, does this, a very simple check, Jay, surely is, does this feel right?
Well, ironically, one of our other, and we've only got 5, but one of our others, which I think is key to what you've just said, is being courageous. And for me, that means don't automatically follow the crowd, but be willing to follow the crowd if you feel that there's a necessity or benefit of doing so. But being equally willing to stand out from the crowd and to say, do you know what? I respect what you've chosen to do, but that's not for me. And I'm more than happy to stand alone, but stand comfortably, as opposed to go with the crowd because that's where the crowd's going. The old adage from Oscar Wilde: the only way to be able to guarantee the future is to create it yourself. So being willing to be able to be courageous, to challenge a status quo, to speak out against things that you don't believe in, or to ask questions of, to understand more about, as opposed to simply saying no and shutting it out. To have those open conversations, as I shared with you prior to us coming live, one of my most favoured times in university, and I've spent more of my adult education relearning and learning than I ever did in my formative educational years. I've spent 12 years in university since leaving university, if you like. But one of my most favoured times is for one term in year 2 of my first degree. I was invited to take part in the debating society and just learn how to be able to listen to other people's perspective, and to then either not argue with them, but to challenge and question and listen and learn, and sometimes change opinion and formulate new opinion as a result of listening to others, is probably the greatest gift I could have been given for my formative education, because it's enabled me to be able to question and challenge and then determine what makes me human and what makes me individual.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting, the values that lead people, because when we talk about unethical practices, for instance, in the coaching industry, we might go straight into certain sales strategies, things like that. But if somebody has a value of money, for instance, and they follow that, and that's a value to them, then absolutely that could be classed as following their line of integrity. Yet somebody else who doesn't share value of money and doesn't think that that's got the key to their happiness will say, oh, it's all about the money, that's all they care about, and that's really bad, and they put a value judgment on that. But actually, if somebody is following their value of money and whatever that means to them, they're probably very focused on achieving money and goals and numbers and that kind of thing. And so again, it doesn't make it right or wrong. So where do you think that ethics hit a bit of a block, really, in business and selling in the coaching industry?
Okay, great question. Love these debates. About 2.5 years ago, we joined a global organization called B1G1, the global giving community, in order to align who we are as a business with good causes around the world. And I did a presentation to a large room, probably 400 or 500 people, shortly after I joined. And I came up with this analogy at the top of my head, and it's probably as applicable now as it was then. I believe that at some stage in life, we've probably all watched the cartoon Tom and Jerry. Now, if you recall Tom and Jerry, and if you haven't seen it, where have you been for the rest of my life? You need to
Hello.
You call yourself a coach? What do you mean you're a coach? You've not watched Tom and Jerry. But Tom and Jerry. Jerry symbolizes the fat cat. And Tom, the little agile mouse, is money. And in the cartoon, as we know, Jerry races around all over the place, comes up with all of these harebrained schemes, tries his damnedest to try and catch Tom, and Tom always evades capture. And the whole thing ends with Jerry being absolutely shattered, usually battered and bruised and completely giving up. And then Tom getting bored, and simply coming and sitting by him and sharing the cheese anyway. And that's always the ending of Tom and Jerry. Sorry if I've spoilt the
Spoiler alert! Should have told you that, listeners.
But the simple fact is, the same's true in life. Now, I'm really fortunate. I've already had and grown and exited a couple of businesses successfully. I'm not in a position now where I need money. I do this because I enjoy doing what I do and thankfully get reimbursed accordingly. But if I look at the times in my life where I've really been strapped for cash, you go through an unacrimonious divorce, and all of a sudden you go from a significant wealth to far less wealth. There have been times in my life where I haven't had two bob to scrap together, and I've had to think about sofa surfing to be able to get through. It's not always been the privileged lifestyle that some people might perceive from social media. But if I look at throughout life, of my own life and that of my clients and my friends and my family and the likes, and then I apply the Tom and Jerry principle. If we continually have money as the only goal that we chase, Tom loves to play the game, and money will always be one step ahead of you. Regardless of how much you earn, it's never enough. There's always a bigger goal, a more goal, something else. Some of the richest people in the world are being treated for depression. Money will not make you happy, so let's change the dialogue, let's change the intellect and determine as to what else we could do. So I changed my focus in 2018 when we joined B1G1, and our founding principle, if you like, our core value is about giving to others, being of service. So we've set a premise within the business. Is it a win for them? Is it a win for us? And is it a win for the universe? Does everybody win? Or is there a winner at the cost of one of the other two?
Is there a loser?
And we'll only do business now when it's a win-win-win. A win for them, a win for us, and a win for the universe. So what I've determined is, if we change our focus to being impact-driven, how big an impact can I have? How many people can I have an impact on? What's the size of the impact we can have? If I chase impact and not money, Tom simply gets bored and comes and finds you anyway.
Yeah, that's a really great metaphor, and I'm pretty sure that that's going to land with everybody now forever. We'll never look at Tom and Jerry the same if we do ever catch them on our screens these days. But it's true, and again, the story there is like, stop chasing. It could be anything, couldn't it? Tom could be love, Tom could be peace, Tom could be money. It's like the chasing isn't going to work. And I think that's like, then we think about the burnt out coaches and the people that are like, I'm doing everything and I'm not, Tom still evades me. And so there's a huge amount to learn in there as well. And also there's, you mentioned one of your principles being courage. And I think courage is really important, because we've got to be able to be courageous enough sometimes to let go of what we are chasing and sit in that energy and that space and go, do you know what? I'm just going to think about what I really want and what I really want to do. And sometimes that can feel, I've been there, I can go into that space. I'm sure you can as well. And anyone listening, and you think, oh, I don't know about that. Oh, I don't know. And it feels a little shaky in there. And you kind of jump back into your comfort zone. But if you really found space to connect with yourself and think about, what do I really want to do? If I could do anything in the world before I exit, what is that going to be? And really just start to hear that, and then follow that trail a little bit more in just what you do daily. And it's a big trust thing, isn't it? One of my values is of trust, and it's a big trust thing of trusting myself, trusting my own inner self, my own values. A lot of people, Jay, they don't trust themselves in the first place. So they look outward, a lot of outsourcing going on, absorbing other people's maps of the world, other people's principles, other people's values. Well, that sounds quite good from Jay. I think I'm going to go with integrity and courage now as well. But, it's like, how do you really dig into your own set of values? So I think that's I think that's where it begins and ends. And I think that's where you can't go wrong.
Absolutely.
And I think it doesn't
Absolutely.
matter what you apply it to, your relationship, your family, your business, your sales. I mean, I teach sales, and I never teach people to just sell unethically. And by that, I mean just like banging out all the lines and all the tricks and all the strategies and just dosing them up high level until that person's like, oh, yeah, okay, bamboozling them. Which, to be honest, the wrong use of any tools can happen, and that can happen because sales communication, any kind of influential work that we do, can be incredibly powerful, which is sometimes why NLP gets a bad rap, because it's a very powerful form of communication. But goes back to the beginning of this conversation, and it seems like it's going to be the end of this conversation. It's all about the people, not the skills, not the stuff. It's about you, me, and whoever's listening. It's who you are, who you really are. And some people's version of success, well, everyone's version of success is very different. But for me personally, if I might just share, it's when I put my head on the pillow at night, I can sleep like a baby, and I don't wake up in the middle of the night thinking, oh, I don't know, was that right? Did I say that? Oh gosh, worrying about anything or anything that's niggling me. I can sleep and I can rest up, and I can know that I'm, on my track, building my business the way I want to. And when it starts to feel like too much, I can pull back, or when it starts to feel, not enough, I can go forward, but I can just sleep easy. Do you know, one of my other values is inner peace, and I do have to feel that. I do have to feel that. And so I think it's really interesting. I hope that this has given an insight via you for the listeners to literally think, well, it's not that complicated. Just look at your value set. Look at what matters to you in life. Look what moral compass you follow. And if you've been following what your parents, even now our age, said for all those years, question it. If we don't reject it, we accept it. So, it's question what's around you. Do I really feel like that? Do I really buy into what my mentor says, or what my dad's always saying, or my mum, or my best mate, or my peers? Do I really agree with that? Because you'll start to find some new steers then, and then just obviously follow the pathway from there. So is there, I was going to say, is there anything we haven't covered, but then that might lead us into another hour. But was there anything that you're just kind of like burning to say, or any last tip that is really concise and goes straight to the heart of ethics in the coaching industry? If you were only able to say one thing to anyone, what would it be?
I'm going to offer two quick thoughts. First of all, if people like to read, then there is a great book out there called The 7-Second Philosophy from Derek Mills. He talks about not doing anything unless you've taken 3 breaths first. For the first 7 seconds, sit and decide as to where does it sit in my head? Where's my conscious mind telling me about where I should go and what I should do and the decisions I should make? Then take a second breath and push the decision down into your heart and ask yourself an emotional question about, am I emotionally connected with the outcome here? Or am I just feeling like this is a conscious clinical decision? Have I got any emotion around the outcome that I'm looking for and what I'm willing to do in exchange for that? And that's where most people tend to sit. We make 80% of the decisions with our heart and then justify it with our heads. But Derek says, take another 7 seconds and push it down further into your gut, and then say, and how does it feel about me? And take ourselves out the equation and establish, am I the right person to enable this? Is this the right time for me to do this? And just sit with it in your gut for another 6 or 7 seconds. And if the 3 are aligned, then the chances are it's the right decision. And if one of them isn't, then it's time to be able to look a lot deeper into finding out as to what that is and why that is, to establish whether it is going to be a win-win-win or not.
I love that. I love that. Just a comment as well. It's just the same. It's lots of things redressed, repositioned, so that we can land them properly. And that is like, just a great example of alignment, which is of course a huge word that we spout out a lot. Are we in alignment? And we all know what that feels like. That stream of consciousness. I must do this. I think I should do this. Yes, definitely. My brain's telling me to do this. And you hear that split a lot, and I work with that split. Well, my head tells me this, and my heart's saying this, and we've had that push pull. I'm sure you've had it. I've had it. And so, do we ever sort of go deeper down into that gut? But it's always the gut that's driving in the first place. And then what normally happens, in my experience, and I'm sure yours as well, is that we might go, we might push that away. Certainly in the past, I have. And it will rumble and it will rage and it will make you feel anxious and it will do all kinds of things, and it's telling you, waving the flags, no. But your head's going, yes, it's fine, just carry on as you are. Or your heart is going, we want this, I want this. And so I really, really love that. And that's the 7-second philosophy by, remind us again, Jay?
Derek Mills. So go find that one, because that is just it's another version in my mind of perspectives work, and getting those perspectives on those different parts of you. And again, very much about the power of the pause. Massively so. I mean, there's nothing that's going to change if you take another 3 seconds or 3 breaths to give consideration to it.
Yeah, we feel like that sometimes, don't we, though? You're like, I must make a decision. I must make a choice. The sales page is going to expire. Everything's counting down. The countdown time is on. Oh my God, it's the last time ever. And we get into that frenzy, and that is actually quite unethical in my book, in sales, in coach. That's quite unethical. Time, it's great. It's reality. You need a timeline. You need a genuine offer and a time that it does actually finish. But if it just starts again the next week the same, then that's pretty unethical.
Amen.
So
but if I can finish on a quote, can I finish on a quote?
You can.
Success is not measured by what you achieve, but by what you learn to tolerate. Therefore, if you wish to be able to establish a greater level of success, first learn to ask yourself a better question.
Well, we could spend a while unpacking that. Make of that what you will, everyone. And again, this is what's so wonderful about quotes like that, because they're going to land differently with everybody. What I love about that is that, let's ask better questions of ourselves, of others, and keep being courageous, keep inquiring, and don't be scared to stand up and say, do you know what, this just does not vibe with me, and maybe I'll be a loner for a little while I figure out, but that's better than following a crowd that's just not my tribe, my vibe. So thank you so much, Jay. Super interesting conversation. I hope that you have all enjoyed it. Where can people find out a little bit more about you or come and say hello?
I'm on LinkedIn probably more than I ever should be. So if you just type into the LinkedIn, My True North UK or Jay Allen UK, then you'll find me quite happily.
Wonderful. Okay. And I would definitely suggest reaching out and having a chat with Jay, because we often create time for each other to have these conversations, not just in a podcast, and they're really valuable, I think, and have forged a great friendship. So thank you for that. If you want to subscribe to Coach, you can go to coach-magazine.com and you can subscribe there to receive this kind of podcast to your inbox every time I do a new one or we have a new article. Likewise, you can be published if you would like to submit an article to Coach. I would love to read your submissions, and all of that can be done on the Be Featured page as well. Sign up to the podcast, don't miss any episodes, and you can connect with me. I'm also on LinkedIn quite a lot, so you can connect with me there, and I help female coaches to sell with success and integrity. So if you're looking for a mentor around that, maybe look no further. So thank you for tuning into the podcast. I'm wishing you all a great day wherever you are, and I'm sure that I'll be back in your inbox soon. Take care for now. Thank you so much, Jay.
God bless. Take care. Thank you.